It's time to put a bit of balance back into your lives. We are here to break down the UFC on ABC, UFC Jacksonville card. To give away a bit of time, we're straight after it here. So everything is fresh, everything is raw. And raw would be a quite good word to describe that main event. That was Ilia Topuria versus Josh Emmett in the featherweight division. Big test for Topuria coming in against the seasoned veteran and Josh Emmett. Maycee Barber and Amanda Ribas went at it in the co-main event, and we are here to discuss those two fights and the rest of the card. As always, my main man, Harry Powell, is here to decipher, break down, and analyze all of the action. I'm looking forward to hearing his thoughts. You should be too. If you like what you hear, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, give us a follow. We appreciate your support. Let's get into it, Harry. An eventful card, much to discuss. And let's kick it off in the 145-pound division. Ilia Topuria came in, like I said, to take on Josh Emmett, to kind of insert himself with a win into the top 5 of the division. And boy, oh boy, didn't he just do that. The talk before coming into this fight was if he would be able to up his game, up the challenge into elite level status with Josh Emmett, who we have to admit maybe isn't once what he was, but still proves a very difficult challenge with some of the skills that he possesses. And we've seen glimmers of that tonight, but overall, Harry, it was Topuria who just announced himself as a legit title contender in the 145-pound division. What's your immediate thoughts after the main event?
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, agreed.
I'll start by just for a moment lingering on Josh Emmett. I think that what we've seen this evening is something that Shawnee has spoken about for a long time. Spencer has spoken about ad nauseum, is that at the elite levels, there is going to be a real predication that if you don't have toughness, is you don't have the ability to take a shot, to give a shot, if you don't have the ability to bite down on the proverbial and legitimate gum shield and walk through some damage in order to get to where you want to be in fights, that you're not going to reach the apex in modern MMA. I think what we saw is the absolute peak from Josh Emmett to be able to survive some of the situations that he did, both at the end of the second and in the fourth. And then again, I think there was a moment in the third, is just unbelievable. For then in the first 45 to 50 seconds of the fifth to come out and look the fresher fighter, to come out and look like the fighter that was in the ascendancy. Now, okay, that didn't last in the fifth, but just an unbelievable tip of the hat. And this is something that, unfortunately, I really struggle with. And I struggle with because we saw and bore witness to the damage that Josh Emmett took from Ilia Topuria. This is now 4 or 5 fights in a row that he has taken a considerable amount of damage. And that, to me as a fan, to me as a media member, is something that's very difficult to try and compartmentalize when more and more as we walk through our journey of MMA, do we understand exactly what that damage is doing to fighters and what the trade-off is for fighters. If you stick around on the SevereMMA Patreon, then you'll see a conversation coming up between Mr. Shawnee Sheehan and myself in the coming days, which is about damage. It's the second damage conversation we've had, and we tried to look at it this time from a slightly different angle. But first and foremost, I think it's really important to tip our hats to Josh Emmett. It was an absolutely wonderful effort. But at this point in time, in this specific fight, on this night, he just wasn't good enough. And that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely it is. Look at it. You and Sean and we kind of all speak about what it takes to be a competitor at the elite level status in the UFC. And, you know, durability is a big thing. And Josh Emmett ticked off the durability box tonight. But unfortunately, you know, based off past kind of performances and losses, his body His speed, maybe a little bit of explosiveness has left him, and that happens to every fighter as they get older and on their career. And that we saw examples of both tonight, his durability and the fact that, you know, maybe he just can't get off the shots that he used to be able to get off, and also the fact that he's in there against an also elite level fighter on the up and up, who's hungry, who hasn't been there before. And that's the joys of being a veteran. You're always going to have these young hungry athletes that are going to be coming up and trying to take your throne, and that's what Josh Emmett had to face with tonight. But Ilia Topuria passed all the tests tonight, ticked off all the boxes. You know, didn't go out there and get a finish, but a super one-sided fight. The judges, Chris Lee scored a 10-7 in round 4, a rare 10-7. I mean, you can't argue too much against it. There's a couple of 10-8s thrown in there as well. So it's about as good as performance, Harry, from Ilia Topuria as you can get without getting that finish. You know, I guess everyone would like to get that finish, but, you know, when you're going in there against a guy like Josh Emmett, it's tough. It's tough to do that. Let's go through it round by round. Let's start with round 1 with Ilia Topuria. We watched the fight together. We were amazed, and we were speaking about how Topuria should approach the fight from a very early stage. And we were hoping that he would maybe tread carefully given the power that Josh Emmett had. And he didn't really tread carefully. He kind of went in there and established himself in the pocket straight away. Talk me through what you've seen in round 1, Harry.
So the first sort of minute to 2 minutes, Topuria was just gauging range. He was gauging, okay, how quick is he? How strong is he? How hard do the shots come? What sort of angles do they come from? What are his footwork patterns like? Like, what does he like to do? How does he like to move? Where does he like to land his shots? All of these sorts of things were being read by Topuria in that first minute and a minute and a half. And I thought that was really smart. It was great because you got to see Topuria put himself in the fire a touch, put himself in line for shots, but he was taking them on the elbow, he was taking them on the shoulders, he was taking them on the hands. These are, you know, not high scoring shots positions because they're not doing effective damage, right? You're landing specifically on defensive portions of the body. As soon as he'd sort of got a read with which he was comfortable with, he started to sit down on his own punches. And in a feature that Spencer over on Kibo Kimura, but it was for the UFC, wrote on Ilia Topuria, Ilia Topuria mentioned that he was going to try to make Josh Emmett miss as much as possible, and he was going to try and show that his striking was just far better than Josh Emmett. And I think that what we saw in that first round specifically was a masterful showing of how to break a fighter down from ranges. So there are generally 3 main ranges in MMA. It's sort of the real kickboxing range where you're at least 1 foot length apart from the fighter. There is then a slightly closer range, which I call like MMA boxing range. And then there's the pocket when you're in a fucking phone booth and you're standing and swinging. Josh Emmett really enjoys either bouncing into the pocket or finding himself in the pocket and using his hooks and swinging his shots both to the body and to the head to allow him to land his power shots. That's really what his game is, right? Everything is to try to get a fighter into those situations. Everything is to try to force a fighter to lower their hands and allow themselves to be hit in those situations. There was a VT that kept playing of Josh Emmett, which was him just absolutely mauling Ricardo Lamas and sending him to the Shadow Realm. And both Ian and I were just, I mean, every time we saw it, there were chills going down our body. What Topuria did so masterfully is he allowed himself to find that pocket range. He allowed Emmett to feel comfortable in the ranges and just kept countering him. To the body, the check right hook was absolutely fantastic. The straight right off the pull was absolutely fantastic. He kept jabbing him. There was low kicks. There wasn't low kicks in round 1, but there was just from an upper body striking phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. He then took, in the last minute or so, just took a step out of range. And then the low kicks started to come. And what he was showing Josh Emmett was that not only am I super comfortable in your range, and not only am I better than you in your range, I'm showing you that I'm better in my range too. And I'm making you fully aware that your A game plan isn't going to work because I'm better here. But also, I'm showing you that if you decide to try and come to my game plan, I'm going to beat you there also. And that was unbelievable.
Yeah, it was like we've seen snippets of that where Ilia was introducing kind of new looks. We saw like extra feints. We saw Josh Emmett biting on a lot more going into the fight. In round two, you described it that round one, round two are going to be competitive rounds, and they were just that. At the end of round two, we've seen the first chink in the armor from Josh Emmett when he kind of got visibly hurt by his strikes, where Topuria kind of poured it on. And I think it was that moment, Harry, I don't know whether you agree or not, where the real turning of the tide happened in this fight. It was the kind of the separation of them both, where, Topuria was fully engaged, fully comfortable at range. His distance control at this stage was beautiful. He was just getting out of the way of shots. I mean, you don't have to make a fighter swing and miss wildly. Like, you can just get out of the way of strikes, even if it's just an inch, even if it just brushes off the glove. That's you being defensively sound. And as the fight grew, we saw that with Topuria as well. Anything that was introduced in rounds 2, 3, and 4. We maybe would talk about rounds 2, 3, and 4 as a collective, maybe, because it was just a turning of the screw for Ilia Topuria. He was starting to get more and more dominant in this rounds. And then maybe we'll talk about maybe something that we noticed about Topuria in round 5. But please talk me through stages of round 2, 3, and 4. What really impressed you mostly about Topuria's performance?
So there was a couple of things, and one is kind of a negative, but there's a positive spin to it as well. Mostly it's just his calmness and his footwork. Those were the two things that kept screaming out to me. Josh Emmett is a very explosive fighter. He's a fighter that can land big, can throw bowling ball shots, but also can bound into range, has his own leg kick arsenal, has his own body kick arsenal, has an ability to land a variety of strikes on his own. But Topuria's ability to cut the cage off, to always be breaking that center of gravity, and to always be defensively aware, for the most part, was just fantastic. Really, really, really good. And when you're Josh Emmett, especially in round 2, when he gets dropped at the end of the round, you have to be thinking, okay, right, what have I learned so far? Well, what I've learned so far is if I just jump into the pocket, he's slipping and he's countering me. That's not good. So I can't be investing a serious amount of time into that. Fine. What do I do now? Well, what I do now is I'm going to try and push him back slightly with my footwork. Okay, well, that's now not working either because he's dominating the footwork battle and I'm the one having to take the back steps. So what can I do now? Well, what you're limited to is a number of options. And the number of options are you can skirt along the cage and then you can explode into range. You can try to grapple, or you can allow Topuria to come to you and try and land your shots. Well, Topuria was doing an absolutely fantastic job of just stepping out of the way with his footwork when Josh Emmett came in. There wasn't any grappling exchanges from Josh Emmett. But what we did see is when Emmett was allowing Topuria to come in, there was that calm almost was a little too much at times because Topuria 2 or 3 times got into exchanges in the pocket. Emmett catches him. Topuria has to respect that power once more. But the problem for Emmett is if you don't have a way to initiate that, if you don't have a way to force those exchanges, then it just becomes really, really difficult to try and gauge those situations continuously because Topuria is also making the read that I don't want to be in those situations too often. So let me get back to my P's and Q's of my footwork and my jabs and shots off the pull. The other thing that really impressed me about Topuria was, as you could have alluded to it before, it was the layers, right? It was the layers of looks. So it started with just taking shots on elbows and shoulders and whatever. He then started literally shoulder rolling and almost like Philly shelling at times. Then he would roll under shots. He would take back steps at an angle instead of just going straight back. There was just a plethora, a smorgasbord of looks for Josh Emmett. And that can be overwhelming as a fighter as well. And then we get to the 4th. And I mean, by the 4th, the accumulation of damage for Josh Emmett, it wasn't just leg kicks. It wasn't just jabs. It was all the big right hands. It was the body work that had been thrown in. Just everything together accumulated in this destructive 35 seconds of damage from Ilia Topuria. And you and I at the time were calling for the fight to be stopped. And I think neither of us would have had a problem if it actually was stopped. And then we discussed about Josh Emmett not being allowed out for the 5th round, but he was, and the 5th round was what it was.
Yeah, like at this stage, at the end of round 4, we had Topuria, who had hurt Josh Emmett, his face badly busted up, cut, his left eye swollen badly. And that fight was close to being stopped. Even that finishing sequence when Topuria was laying it on Josh Emmett towards the end of the 4th round. To me, if the ref had kind of came in there and stepped in, I wouldn't have argued all too much. Similar enough to what you said, we were saying in the corner as well. If they were to kind of pull Josh Emmett at this stage, I mean, what does he have to gain at this stage? He was like, when you get round scored at 10-7, I think it tells its own story a little bit, and the corner failed to do so. Look, we don't see that too much in mixed martial arts, a conversation for another day. And then, there was signs though, and coming towards the end of round 4, or maybe at the start of round 4, we were kind of looking at each other and asking ourselves, was Topuria getting a little bit tired? Was he slowing down a little bit? He's definitely, his output had minimized a little bit more than what we seen at the start of the fight. And there was visible signs of tiredness. And he looked like he was pretty gassed at the start of the 5th round. Obviously, after trying to pour it on to get the fight finished at the end of round 4, it takes an awful lot out of you. But he did look like, I mean, if you were to kind of talk about a chink in the armor of Topuria, it would be that, he wasn't at the same energy levels. Or I mean, no fighter is really at the end of a fight, but it had dropped to a stage where, it was affecting his performance. Would you agree?
I think I would agree. And we sort of called it like late stage round 4. We said, I think Topuria is starting to slow a little bit. And again, at the end of the day, this is his first main event in the UFC. This is his first 5-round fight since 2018, long time ago, right? And I also think there's an element here where he's put an absolute beating on Josh Emmett. And I wonder whether there was an adrenaline dump coming out for round 5. Because if you're Ilia Topuria, regardless of the confidence, regardless of the braggadocious nature of his words, you go out there and you put on a performance for 4 rounds. You've had 20 minutes of fighting. And that last 30 seconds, I think most other fighters get finished there. Josh Emmett, again, we credit him and his toughness for his ability to survive, his ability to do enough so that Mark Goddard could not step in. I wonder whether Ilia Topuria came out in round 5 and just could not believe in some portion that this fight was still continuing and that Josh Emmett was bouncing around with the freshness that he was. Now, that's not me saying that Topuria is mentally weak or anything like that. I don't think it's that at all. I just think he's
it's a new experience for him against elite. Like, guys like Josh Emmett are going to come back when you throw the kitchen sink at them, and it's completely understandable where you have a little bit of adrenaline rush. And look, we're simply nitpicking here at Ilia Topuria. If we were to, we have to try and give an honest assessment. And yeah, we look at it where we want to praise him for some of the stuff that he does. But I know you do, and all I like to do is I kind of try to liken performances based off what would happen if he was in there with the champion. And we kind of said it, you're not going to be able to afford to give yourself any time off or rounds off if you're going in there and fighting Alex Volkanovski. You can't afford to slow down. Actually, you have to kind of do the exact opposite against Volkanovski. I would believe you start slow and try and finish fast against a guy like him. But it's Topuria's first 5-rounder there. He's going to learn from that. He's going to grow from that, and he's going to come in and make a couple of adjustments. And I'd be interested to see what's next. But any final thoughts maybe on that? And we are nitpicking, of course, before I interrupted you. So please continue.
No. I think for me, the main thing here on the nitpicking is we're talking about elite level MMA.
Yeah.
This isn't nitpicking, because when you get to elite level MMA, it's these tiny margins that win or lose fights. Now, in this one, Topuria was so vastly more skilled than Josh Emmett in this, that small chink in the armor of that sort of slow 5th round to begin with was not capitalized on. However, what I was so impressed on, and this is where the positive comes from that position, is let's say it was an adrenaline dump and not a cardio issue. Then what Topuria did to fix that was incredible. So he comes out in the 5th round, and that first sort of minute and a bit, Josh Emmett looks lively, looks fresh, lands a couple of shots, and Topuria just seems to be reacting in a way that's a little more aggressive than before. Turns his back a couple of times, really rotates his shoulders over to take shots on the back of the shoulder rather than on the jaw. And then you can tell that the momentum inside Josh Emmett's soul is starting to build a little, because he's had a sniff for the first time in 5 rounds that there's a chink here. There's a chance. There's a chance that he can bring this back and drag this back. And he is so tough and so durable and so willing that if you give him that chance, he's going to absolutely run to the hills with it. And so Topuria just lines him up for a double leg, changes levels absolutely gorgeously, and sits Josh Emmett down to the mat. Now, that's not just a double leg, right? The reason why that was so impressive to me is you've just done 21 to 22 minutes of fighting. You've set your own rhythm. You've set your own pace. You're however much depleted in your own gas tank. And yet you have the mental capacity and the cerebral awareness to understand that the tide is changing, to understand that the situation has changed. And he sees an opportunity to take away the rhythm of Josh Emmett, the momentum of Josh Emmett, and even more than that, to completely change the dynamic of the fight, because up until that point, we'd not seen a dramatic amount of grappling. The only grappling we saw really was when Josh Emmett was hurt in the 4th round, sorry. And so to come under, hit such a clean double leg on a grappler of the ilk of Josh Emmett was wonderful to begin with. But all the subsidiary, all the tertiary sort of progressions that come from that, that's championship level IQ for me.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And look, we had those thoughts coming in here, but now we have more confirmation given that test. What next test would you like to see for Ilia Topuria? I guess that's the next question now, because he's ticked off that box. Do you throw him straight into a title shot? Do you prime him up against maybe a top 3 level guy? What would you like to see for Ilia Topuria next?
So it's a good question. I don't really have a problem seeing him fight the winner of Korean Zombie versus Max Holloway, but in the same vein, after watching the last Max Holloway performance, I am not sure that Max Holloway is necessarily the same fighter. And so I don't want to be, and again, this isn't me, I don't mean to sound quite like I'm sounding, but I think he goes out and I think he beats Korean Zombie. But I think that it's going to be one of those Max Holloway performances where it's a war of attrition. There's just so much volume that Zombie can't get close to him. But I think Zombie lands, and I think Zombie looks okay in the openings of that fight. But I wonder whether Max Holloway now at this point, after being through the amount of wars he's been through, the amount of tough weight cuts and the amount of damage, the amount of just wear and tear on his body at the age he is, I'm not sure that that's still the test,
Plus with Max Holloway, he's done that with Arnold Allen as well. He's already fended off one of these young and up-and-comers. Do we want to put him in a position where he's doing it again? Maybe he wants that challenge, but the problem is, and we kind of touched on it when we were watching the fight, the problem is by matching Volkanovski and Max Holloway as much as they did, is that fight is almost dormant now. You can't do it again. It's disappointing that they did it in such quick succession, because you kill off moments like this and opportunities for Max Holloway by doing it, who, would have been good enough to probably go out and pick up the wins that he is picking up right now. And obviously he's going in against the Korean Zombie. That is an option. You throw Topuria there straight into a title shot as an option. Maybe someone like Brian Ortega, you could maybe do a fight like that. I'm not sure if Ortega is matched up or anything like that. So
Ortega's not matched up, but he's also coming off 2 losses. The name I was going to throw is Arnold Allen, because Arnold Allen gets pushed through the Max Holloway grinder. Fine. He loses to Max Holloway, no problem. Well, to me, he's still absolutely right there. And for Arnold Allen, does he want to wait for the winner of Volkanovski and Yair? Because whoever loses that, let's say Yair loses that. Well, there's not going to be an immediate rematch, right? Well, if you're Arnold Allen, do you want to wait and then say, well, give me Yair because he's the guy that's, just gone and fought for the title. Let me fight that guy. And then there's a bit of a tussle between Max Holloway, should he beat Korean Zombie and whatever. Or if you're Arnold Allen, do you go out and take the fight against Ilia Topuria? If you beat Ilia Topuria and Max Holloway goes and beats Korean Zombie, you could be like, well, Max has only just beaten the Korean Zombie. Like, he's never getting a title shot anytime. But I've just gone out and I've done what Max Holloway was supposed to do, which is turn away Ilia Topuria. Give me the next guy. Like, I wonder whether that's the fight.
And I think that Arnold Allen would take the hand and everything off you if you were to offer him that, to be honest. And it'd be interesting to see what Topuria's mindset would be in, for lack of a better term, fighting down in competition, fighting down in rankings, not in competition, I guess. And it's the predicament that they're going to have to figure out, because Topuria had the mindset that if he gets this win, he expects to be next in line for the title. And that's the way you should be talking in that position. You know what I mean? Because if you ain't talking like that, you're not going to get the title shot. And I mean, Arnold Allen found that out the hard way as well. So it'll be very, very interesting to see what happens there. Let's touch on Josh Emmett for a second. What would we like to see next for him? Because without sounding too harsh, I think his days as a top level, elite level fighter at the top of that division are coming to an end. Do we want to see him testing himself against all these young killers, or do we want to see him maybe round off his career with a couple of good fights, similar enough to what Max Holloway is getting right now? You could throw him in with somebody like the Korean Zombie or somebody a little bit lower down the rankings. Is he a gatekeeper for the top 10? All very harsh critics, but that's the reality of the situation that you're in when you go out and lose these type of fights. What would you like to see for Emmett next? Would you like to see him fight at all? I mean, has he done?
I don't think I would. I think that whilst I undoubtedly feel like we could match Josh Emmett up with fights that he can absolutely be competitive in and absolutely win, I just don't know whether we're in a situation here with Josh Emmett where you're looking at a guy who's just too tough for his own good and won't know when to stop. Like, if you said to me, Josh Emmett's going to take 6 months off and fight Brian Ortega, I think he beats Brian Ortega. I really do. Like, I don't think Brian Ortega is going to take him down, at least not unless he forces the respect with his hands, which I don't think he'll do that either. I think Brian Ortega's hittable and Josh Emmett hits like a truck. And I think that's a good fight for Josh Emmett. But do I want to see him go in, fight Brian Ortega, and then off the back of that win, given the number next to Brian Ortega's name, then be put in with whoever it is, right?
That's the thing, isn't it? It's the thing. Losses have consequences, but wins also have consequences as well at the same time. It's an interesting predicament. I honestly, look, like you said, it was like I wouldn't be too upset if Emmett did hang it up, but I don't think that he is going to want to. That's the thing. I don't think he's going to want to.
Me neither, but I think for me, there is an element as a fan, purely as a fan, not even as a media member, just as a fan, that Josh Emmett has given us enough. We don't deserve more of Josh Emmett. He's 38 years old. He has given us enough. He has given us enough of his blood, his sweat, his tears, his hard work, his preparation, and his weight cutting. I am all for, if he wants to stick around and have a couple of fun fights, right? If he wants to do a Dan Ige, an Edson Barbosa, if he wants to do a Korean Zombie, if he wants to do these types of fights, fine. But if he's going to come in here and say, oh, well, give me Sadiq Youssef, give me Giga Chikadze, give me, Movsar Evloyev, I don't know that I want to see that. I just don't know that I want to see that.
That's totally fair. That's totally fair. I actually don't mind that Danny Ige shout either. That would be pretty interesting. But to round it off, another fantastic performance from Ilia Topuria, who has cemented himself into the top 5 of the featherweight division. Very, very excited to see what the future holds for him. And also excited to see what the future holds for Maycee Barber, who came in and really put on an impressive performance over Amanda Ribas in the co-main event. We spoke about this fight as two prospects and, who have been UFC tried to push them up the rankings. They didn't have things go their way. And this was the perfect fight at the perfect time to see who's next in line to get that push up the 125-pound division. On the night, it was Maycee Barber that prevailed. It was a really good performance from Maycee Barber. I would like to even state it was probably the performance of Maycee Barber's career, in my humble opinion. Curious to hear what your overall thoughts are, Harry.
Just another perfect learning fight for Maycee Barber. Perfect learning fight. And that's insane to say when she's in the top 10 of her weight class, but she's only 25. We're only 11 fights deep in her career. 15 fights deep in her career. I'm so enamored by the ceiling that she has, right? The ability to go out. She starts in southpaw, lands some really nice jabs. Ribas switches southpaw, and then she offers her different arsenal. Throws some low kicks. The check right hand is landing all night long when Ribas switches back to orthodox. We see leg kicks. We see body kicks. We see a ton of feints that set up the left high kick. We see the ability to land really lovely short elbows in a clinch situation. We see the strength. We see the power. We see the athleticism. We also see her get tested in some tough spots, right? The nose is bloody. There's a knee bar attempt. There are lots of things that she can take away, both from her striking, but also from some of her grappling transitions that she will look at and say, well, when I see a number that's less than 5 next to my name, I'm going to need to make sure that this stuff is way better. But for right now, the grit, the toughness, the power, the willingness to sit down on the shots, the feints, the variety, the setups, just watching her perform in comparison to 5 fights ago, it's just an completely different fighter. And that to me is incredibly exciting.
Absolutely. It is for me as well. Like, I think in all the madness we forget, and even me and you said it watching it, is like, Maycee Barber's only 25 years of age. She's got plenty of time to grow into the fighter that she's going to become. And I expect a lot of growth over the coming years as well. It's about matching her with the right tests at the right time. And that's why I loved this matchup so much, because I felt it was the right test. You're fighting 2 ranks ahead of you in Amanda Ribas. You're fighting a very winnable fight, and you're going to get tested too. And this fight ticked off all those boxes. For me, the definition of the win for Maycee Barber here was her strength advantage in the clinch, her ability to kind of dictate where the fight went. Although she did end up in some positions that she probably wouldn't have liked to have ended up in, she still showed the kind of nous to get herself remain calm and get herself out of those positions. And overall, as the fight progressed, it was her shots that were landing more impactfully, her work in the clinch. It was a short elbow on the inside that caused the original cut for Amanda Ribas, who in return bloodied Maycee Barber's nose, who in return bloodied Amanda Ribas's nose. There was lots of bloodshed in this fight as well. But for Maycee Barber, I was really impressed about her composure. The fact that she pushed and she got the finish, where, she had been, and there was people critical over her recent performances, saying that she got some split decisions that she likely didn't deserve. That's a matter of opinion, but she didn't need the judges tonight. She went out there and she put Amanda Ribas away in the middle of the second round. And it was like, I agree with you 100%. It was a breakout performance for Maycee Barber. It was the exact performance that you would need in that position. And it's a good platform to kind of move on and challenge the next opponent in the division. But any other thoughts on this before we talk maybe about what's next for Maycee Barber? Anything to add on based off what I said there?
No, mostly just complete agreement that what we're looking at is, yes, okay, a 25-year-old, but a 25-year-old, as you say, that's still learning, still growing, still adding things to her game. And, obviously I'm interested to see what name you've got. But for me, we still take the slow road here. Like, what Maycee Barber hasn't shown me is the level of excellence that I've seen from, say, an Erin Blanchfield, who to me is bordering on being undeniable at a title shot very, very, very soon, should she go in and do the business against Taila Santos. However, I look at somebody like a Maycee Barber and I say, well, if I see her in 2, 3, 4, 5 fights time, we may well have a different opinion. And so I have no problem with the slow roll. I am very, very impressed with what Maycee Barber has done with the tool set that she has right now. And I'm very, very excited for the future.
Yeah, as am I. Let's talk names then. Let's talk what's next for Maycee Barber. And I'm not sure if they've fought in the past, but Lauren Murphy would be a good test, I think, for Maycee Barber next. You get that veteran test. Lauren Murphy is very durable in there as well. She's going to always come in and give you a tough test. What would you think about that fight?
I don't mind that fight. I think the issue I have with that fight is I don't see what new wrinkle it asks of Maycee Barber other than the toughness wrinkle.
It's just another fight though, dude. It's another chance for her to get in a camp and to work on her skills. Like, I mean, she might not learn anything. Like, I would be reluctant at this stage to throw Maycee Barber up into top 5 or have her facing top 3 level opponents yet. I don't think she's and that's the sole reason why I would have picked Lauren Murphy. Like, let's, if she only has to fight one fighter ahead of her in the rankings, let's do that maybe for a couple of fights. Let's slow roll her up the division and make sure that when she gets there this time, that she is completely ready. She is completely developed, because let's remember, we've tried and failed once already with Maycee Barber, and we don't want to do it again. So I don't think that the division is in mad need of new prospects or new challengers coming up. I think there's plenty there right now. Obviously, we have Manon Firo and Rose Namajunas is a new entry into the 125-pound division. Erin Blanchfield is there. Talia Santos is there. And obviously, we have the champ, Alexa Grasso, who's going to be defending her title against Valentina Shevchenko. So it's fairly hot and heavy at the top of that division right now. So that's why I would be leaning more on the slow roll with Maycee Barber. Maybe I should have explained that when I dished out that matchup, but we got there in the end.
No, I mean, I think you're absolutely right, and I agree. I think in terms of ranking, the option I would offer is Katlyn Chookagian. And the reason why I offer that is I think we can, or Jennifer Maia, one of the two. And I like them for reasons. I like the Katlyn Chookagian matchup because she's long, she's a kickboxer, she really knows how to dictate range, and she can also do a bit of the grappling. And so I think for Maycee Barber, that would be a test of how do you deal with somebody who controls range well? Can you break that distance? Can you break it effectively? Can you mix in some grappling? We know that Katlyn Chookagian has a brown belt from John Danaher, and that means a lot. What can we see from Maycee Barber in terms of a mature performance that's not, I go in against Amanda Ribas and I'm not taking anything away from the performance, but I'm going to go in and I'm just going to be the bigger, fucking stronger bastard, and I'm going to get you out of there. Cool. Let's see if that works. If that similar approach works against Katlyn Chookagian, fine, no problem. If not, let's see how tactically you stick to a game plan. The Jennifer Maia option, I like because Jennifer Maia hits hard. She's happy to get in the face of somebody, and she can really grapple. And so I don't mind either of those. And I have no problem with Lauren Murphy either. I really don't have a problem. I just want to see, and I want Maycee Barber in her camps in the fights coming up, not just to have the onus of I need to improve my full skill set, because that's obvious. What I also want to see is a very specific need to improve on a specific skill set.
Yeah, no, I can't argue against that either, and it's be very interesting to see, because it's an exciting future for the future Maycee Barber as she heads into face the elite level, I guess, in the division. There's no looking back now at this stage after a performance like that. Unfortunate ending to the heavyweight mid kind of main card fight. Justin Tafa, Austin Lane. Fight didn't really have a chance to get going whatsoever, Harry. I mean, we had a small exchange, and then, Austin Lane was looking to push off, and his index finger went right bad into the eye of Justin Tafa. We saw Justin Tafa wince, and from the immediate reactions in these occasions how bad an eye poke is, don't you, Harry?
We do. I think most fighters, it's fair to say that almost every fighter wants to continue fighting, right? There is very, very few fighters and very, very few instances of fighting where a situation occurs and a fighter does not want to continue. Like physically doesn't want to continue, not can't continue, but physically does not want to. I can only really think of one in the last, or two in the last little while. One was Aljamain Sterling with the knee, and that's absolutely fine. And the second was Max Roshkov, when he said to Robert Drysdale, I just don't have this. I just don't have this one. I just don't have it. And that's two in the hundreds and thousands of fights that have occurred since those occurrences. So when Justin Tafa takes the eye poke and immediately wheels away and immediately carries both of his hands clutched so tightly to his eye and immediately starts shaking his head to Big Dan and the doctor when asked, can you see? I honestly see absolutely no reason why we're continuing to offer 5 minutes. I don't see why the doctor is continuing to offer assistance, words, judgments. The fight's done. Tafa can't see out of his eye. He's clutching it. The doctor then cleans his eye, and Tafa continues not to be able to open it. I don't understand what we're doing. I really don't get it.
Yeah, because look, as you said, fighters are not going to want to quit, or they don't want to say the words, I cannot continue, I cannot go on. It's not built into their gene set. That's what they've been working towards, is building themselves into a position where they're trying to get their opponent to quit, not quit themselves. So to actually say those words out loud, it's not in a lot of fighters' vocabulary. So sometimes the medical team or the coaching team or the ref has to make that decision for them. And look, at the minute the camera cut away and we seen the blood coming out of the eye of Justin Tafa, I knew at that stage it needed to be done. In the end, the right decision was made. Agent 47 came in and spoke into his wrist and said the fight is over. And that was all she wrote in that. What about the doctor, Harry? Let's talk about that for a minute. What the fuck was he doing talking into his wrist? I have no idea.
I mean, the only thing I can think is that he's offering a hand up to Tafa, and he's speaking into his wrist so Tafa can't lip read what he's saying or whatever. But what the fuck? You're mic'd up. We can hear what you're saying.
Exactly.
What are we? In football and stuff, when they're talking about free kicks and they put their hand up so either the camera can't lip read or the opposition players can't see, whatever.
Sure.
None of those cunts are mic'd up. You've got a big old fucking microphone strapped to you. What are we doing? What are we doing?
Exactly. I don't know. Maybe he thought it was a covert operative there, and yeah, look at in the end, we can't be too critical on him. He made the right decision. The fight was called off after just 29 seconds of the first round, ended in a no contest. Obviously, we hadn't had enough action to score the fight. And we'll probably do that again, Harry. We'll probably do that again, I'd say. Send them in there, let them go to battle, stick him on another third fight from the end on another fight night card in another month or two. And I'd say everyone will be happy at that. Yep, we shall move on. David Onama versus Gabriel Santos. We were high on this fight before it came in, and we were right, because this fight was absolute fire. We were really impressed with Santos and how he handled Leron Murphy on his debut. Coming in at short notice, put on a really, really good performance against him. We were excited to see what he had coming in here against Onama in the featherweight division. And he got off to a really good start here, Harry. Gabriel Santos did, cause some big problems. Looked to have Onama hurt. He won the first round on the scorecards, and he would have been very happy going into the corner at the end of the first round. How do you assess? I know obviously Onama had some moments of his own in round one, but definitely I would agree with the judges that Santos took the first round in what was a very, very exciting technical battle. We had some exciting fights later on in the card, not so technical, but as Harry looks towards the sky. But please break down round one between Onama and Gabriel Santos.
Gabriel Santos gave David Onama absolutely everything he could handle in that first round. Santos came in, he was aggressive. He looked to land big shots early. He looked to put a pace on David Onama, which is something that we've seen Onama struggle with previously. And just generally went out, and he understands the scoring criteria, right? The scoring criteria says do a lot of the hitting and do a lot of the hitting with some impact. Thanks. That was Gabriel Santos's MO in this. And I thought he was absolutely brilliant in doing so. Had a lovely bit of variety, was happy to hit inside the pocket, was happy to bound into the pocket and land. Just looked good all around, had some nice low kicks, mixed in some grappling exchanges. All in all, I was very, very, very impressed. And then David Onama said, yeah, that's cool. How about this for some power? And they didn't pick it up on comms. They didn't pick it up on the replay, but Ian O'Neill picked it up. Talk to me about some elbows, Mr. O'Neill.
Oh, it was absolutely unbelievable. His work on the inside in the second round was sensational. And it did start with those short elbows on the inside. And he came over the top with a right hand as well, which really caught Santos off guard. Where, when you're in the pocket and you're expecting shots over, you're going to look to try and duck out of the way. And when he did do that, Onama decided to throw the uppercut, which was the beginning of the end for Santos. And that shot selection was sensational. I was losing my shit on the couch watching it, because you're talking about a guy who went out there and had his back against the wall and lost the first round, but came in composed and fought very, very intelligently. He found a way. David Onama found a way when things weren't going his way. Santos looked to be slowing down in the second round, though. That was something that we had noticed beforehand, and it looked like the tide was turning, but it was the elbows and the inside elbows that Onama was throwing over the top, which kind of sent Santos into a kind of a dipping movement to get out of the way, landed the uppercut, and then the accuracy of that finishing sequence was sensational. Keith Peterson did well to jump in and to save Santos for any more direct damage. It was really, really wonderful finishing sequence. A great performance from Onama. Harry?
I really, really liked it. Like, we've talked about Onama. He gets chucked in against Nate Landwehr. We talked about this on the preview show, that's probably a step just a little bit too soon, but it's an important test, right? Because that test is can you put this guy away? Can you hang with this guy? Is this, what sort of a fighter actually are you, right? And so, okay, he failed that test this time out. I think for Santos, I agree with the gassing. And I think, to me, he's a good fighter. He is absolutely right to be in the UFC. He's absolutely of that level. I think that we're going to look back on this in 3 to 4 to 5 fights time and say, going in against Lerone Murphy on your debut is what it is. You just take the fight, you go in, you fight, and whatever happens, happens. But then being matched up with David Onama was probably a step too soon. And so I don't mind if we have Gabriel Santos take a good couple of steps back, allow him to rebuild, and then we'll see where we go from there. I wouldn't mind seeing Onama fight the winner of Nathaniel Wood and Andre Fili.
Oh, yes. I like that. That's excellent. Good show. I cannot argue that. I think that's what we do. And with Santos, I mean, like Harry said, don't give him too strenuous of a test. And let's see what happens in that. Let's see what we're going to find out what happened in the Allen and Bruno Silva fight. Look, I want to talk about Brendan Allen here for a second, because he went out there, Harry, and against Chris Curtis, we were unsure what we were dealing with in terms of what fighter Brendan Allen was for the longest time. The Chris Curtis fights was alarm bells for me, because that fight didn't go his way. He was kind of falling into a trap of maybe winning fights, but then going on to lose them as well, which more than one fighter has experienced in the past. But with Brendan Allen here now, he sealed his 6th win in a row. He's real kind of good run going in the middleweight division now, and a real chance to crack the top 15. And this was another great performance when he was faced with a little bit of adversity. He started the fight, fought very well, clinched up early, had a little bit of adversity, found a way, recovered, and got the submission at 4 minutes 39 of round 1. A really, really impressive performance against a difficult challenge in Bruno Silva as well, Harry.
It is. It's just not smart. Like, there is a portion of Brendan Allen and 6 wins in the middleweight division with the defensive capabilities of Brendan Allen is a stark realization of what the middleweight division is, right? And look, he's gone in against a decent striker in Krzysztof Jotko. He's gone in against a decent grappler against Andre Muniz. And Bruno Silva, managed to survive 3 rounds with Alex Pereira on the feet. And I think that tells you something, maybe, possibly, I don't know. But for me, Brendan Allen, the strongest asset he has is, as you already said, it's just finding a way to win. And that's incredible, an incredibly useful asset. But I really, really need to see, and he's still young. He's only 27, right? And so there is time. But I do think that there is a heavy reliance that's going to need to be made on not getting hit. Because when he gets hit, he really, really gets hit. And then he's on skates and then he has to find a way to win. And so if I'm in Brendan Allen's corner, the Andre Muniz performance was fantastic because there wasn't really a lot of the hitting. It was a lot of the grappling. And Andre Muniz isn't the strongest finisher, isn't on the feet anyway, isn't the strongest striker, and so doesn't pose a great threat. But if I'm now Brendan Allen, 6 fights in the UFC middleweight division, we are looking at a big name. I have a name, and we'll get to it eventually. But if I'm looking up now, I am seriously taking the next 3 to 6 months, however long it is until his next fight is booked. And I am actively trying to fix how much and how cleanly I get hit. Because if he can, then we have a really, really interesting fighter on our hands who's well-rounded enough to put people out himself, hurt Bruno Silva, and didn't even need hooks. Dropped Silva, lands a few shots, looked for a grapevine hook, didn't find one, and said, fuck it, I'm just going to choke him anyway. And did. Yeah. Beautiful.
It was brilliant. I'm ready for the name. Give it to me.
Roman Dolidze.
Very good. Very good. I like that. That's a good challenge for him as well. And I think it's a necessary challenge at this stage. You don't win 6 fights in a row without getting somebody like that. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see what he comes in looking like there, because there is some kind of developments that he does need. Like, you're not going to have the ability to find a way when you're facing the top guys in any division, because you make that mistake to get yourself in trouble. You're going to be put out of there. You're going to be finished. You're going to be toast. So be interesting to see what happens with Brendan Allen. I'm excited to see what his next steps are, but that was a good solid win from him against a relatively unknown dangerous customer. I mean, Bruno Silva can crack, he can knock you out. And I was really impressed also by Allen's fight IQ when he chose to kind of clinch and close the distance early. I love seeing that. Like, why play with the percentage chances here? Give yourself the best possible chance to get the win. That's what Brendan Allen did, although he did play with fire for a little bit and almost got burnt. He got the win in the end, and credit to him. Neil Magny also went out there and did Neil Magny stuff, man. I mean, we were questioning whether Phil Rowe should have been given this opportunity, to be honest. But to be fair, Phil Rowe put up a good fight, but Neil Magny just has an ability to go out there and win fights. And it's a massively underrated trait. He doesn't win them stylishly. He doesn't go out there and blow anybody out of the water at times, but he goes out there and does the most important thing, Harry, and that's win. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, all you have to do is go out there and win. And I prefer to win ugly than not win at all. And I'm sure a lot of fighters in hindsight would as well. And I'm not necessarily saying that he won ugly tonight, but it was a tough, grueling contest. It was your typical Neil Magny fight, wasn't it?
Yeah, this fight was a difficult one to score. And as I've said multiple times, I don't really score fights. I don't really look at fights to score them. I really just look at fights as to what's happening. I know that may sound silly, and maybe it is partially silly, but this fight, it was basically 2 replicas fighting each other. And when you do that to Neil Magny, it's tough because you're asking to beat Neil Magny at his own game. And what I mean by that is standing way long, landing long shots, landing from the outside, and then grappling, clinching, being aggressive, being grindy up front, being grindy with a good head position and some body work or whatever. Like, that's a tough situation to be in. Phil Rowe looked good, right? As I said, we questioned whether Phil Rowe really deserved this opportunity. And I think on name value alone, I still kind of argue that he didn't. But coming in here, a split decision shows you that one of two things. It shows you that the ability of Neil Magny is slipping, and slipping maybe a lot sooner than we thought, or that Phil Rowe has gone away in his time and has improved, or both, right? But I don't question the decision necessarily. I have to admit I wasn't having the keenest eye because Shawnee was telling us about dogs and things in the live chat. We'll peel back the curtain.
He had a day.
He had a day indeed. Shout out to Mr. Sheehan. But yeah, I mean, Neil Magny, I think is another one that we should be taking care of now.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, at the judges were split here. Christopher Lee had it first round Rowe, second round Rowe, and third round Magny. Barry Luxembourg had it the opposite way around. Magny round 1, round 2, Phil Rowe round 3. And then Sal D'Amato had round 1 for Rowe, rounds 2 and rounds 3 for Magny, which ended up in a split decision for Neil Magny. That kind of tells the story of the fight. Pretty close encounter. I didn't look at it that closely either to score it or give my opinion on the cards either. Wasn't that much uproar about it. So, I mean, you know, we're giving out about nothing on Twitter now. So the fact that there wasn't too much uproar about this kind of probably tells the story of this fight as well. But we shall move on. And it was also a big opportunity for Randy Brown as well to come back in and kind of put to bed that performance against Jack Della Maddalena. He needed a kind of big performance here. You know, you were impressed with some of the things that he did in this fight. Please talk about his performance and another good win for Randy Brown against Wellington Turman, who did come down from the middleweight division and made his welterweight debut tonight. Your thoughts?
Happily. So I've just had a bit of a soft spot for Randy Brown for a while. Like, there's a certain type of build of fighter that I really like. And what essentially that build is a really rangy, long fighter. And I think it can be unbelievably useful for a number of reasons. But one of those reasons, like, we look at John Jones, right? And he's exactly that same build, obviously at a higher weight class and whatever, but he's a very similar build where he's long, he's rangy. And the thing that's most impressive is when you find a fighter that's long and rangy, but knows how to use that long and range. They're sort of grown into themselves, as we say. John Jones obviously did that extremely quickly and used it to absolutely devastating effect. And I feel with Randy Brown over the last couple of performances that he's starting to really come into his own. It's taken a long time for him to really start to build a version of himself that I think he could be proud of and performances that he could be proud of. And coming into this one, I had some real questions about what Turman would look like at 170. What was the gas tank going to be like? Would Turman's strength from 185 translate down to 170? But actually on the night, Turman looked far smaller than Randy Brown did. Randy Brown looked a far bigger man, and I was very impressed with Randy Brown's ability to counter grapple. Turman is known for his grappling, and then when they were out in the open, until a slight flurry at the end of the second where some elbows were landed and whatever, he did a really good job of keeping Turman at distance, just keeping him away, landing some low kicks, landing some jabs, just generally an impressive performance from Randy Brown. And I think there is a significant amount of merit in being Randy Brown, where we're not going to see him push for a title. He's not that level of fighter. We're not going to see him breaking into the top 10. I don't think we're going to see him breaking into the top 15 unless we see a D-Rod type performance where he strings a couple of wins together and then finds himself there. But he is absolutely perfectly placed to be just outside that top 15 and is a real tough out for anyone. To me, and I think we said this on the preview show, if not, I was thinking it, he's the Neil Magny replacement, where it's the guy that just knows who he is as a fighter, knows how to do a little bit of everything. And if you go out and if you beat him decisively, you're a really good fighter.
Yeah, like I'm glad you said everything. Like you didn't think that he was going to crack top 15, top 10, because I honestly felt that as well. Where he came in and he performed well, but we didn't really see too much new wrinkles in his game. He didn't change up too much, but what he does is effective, and it always was. I feel, Harry, I'm not sure whether you agree with me or not. I think he probably made a little bit more hard work out of this fight than he should have, given how it started. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. Like he set a pace on Turman. He showed Turman the levels early, and then I think he wanted to chase the finish a little bit too much and rush the finish a little bit. And what I mean by that is just put himself in situations to land big shots. But Turman was then able to land his own strikes, and we then found some clinch situations that Randy Brown then had to show off the counter grappling, had to show off some of the things that he obviously has in the toolbox. But if I'm Randy Brown and I go back and I look at that performance, it's certainly something I'm taking away, which is I was just way better than this dude. And actually, if I'd have just kept on putting a pace on him like I had for the first 3 minutes of the first round, I probably would have found a way out for him in the next sort of 14 minutes,
Yeah, 100%. You said that he is the next Neil Magny. So maybe we put those two guys together and see if the passing of the torch can happen. What would you think about that fight?
I don't mind that fight whatsoever. Like, I think, as we've seen, I don't really want to see him pushed against a Jack Della Maddalena type anytime soon. The names that he's gone against, the Francisco Ronaldo's, Chaos Williams, Jared Gooden type fighters, that's the level for me, right? If we go through and just have a quick look at the fights that he's lost, Jack Della Maddalena, I think we all can be pretty confident that that's a top 10 fighter. Vicente Luque, top 10 for the longest time. Nico Price, these things happen, and that was a really strange finish. And then we have Bilal Muhammad, who's knocking on the title shot, right? Like, no shame in losing to any of those guys, but that's the level for Randy Brown. So I've got no problem with doing a Neil Magny. I also got no problem with doing a Phil Rowe if Neil Magny didn't want to take it. Like, any of those fights is fine for me.
100%. Moving on to the lightweight division, Mateusz Rebecki took on Lok Radzhabov. And I was really, really impressed by Rebecki in this fight, who looked a completely different fighter than we've seen on his UFC debut. I'm sure you were just as impressed, Harry.
Damn was. Like, Rebecki came out and looked timid, a little gun shy, a little nervous. And look, I can't take anything away from him. A UFC debut is an absolutely massive thing, and I think it affects fighters in different ways. Long standing have we heard the phrase UFC jitters, especially on a UFC debut. And so I think we always colloquially now have come to judge fighters based on their second UFC performance instead of their first one. And Rebecki came out here, and whether it was because he knew that Radzhabov had a tough weight cut, obviously he missed weight by a couple of pounds, whether he just thought, well, I know I came out here, I performed really poorly to my own standards last time, and I still got the win, and that means I absolutely belong here. Or whether he came out and was just like, fuck it, I'm just going to go and put it on this dude. But he came out, his footwork was aggressive, his head movement was aggressive, and every shot that he was throwing was thrown with bad intentions. And Radzhabov just didn't really have an answer for it. And when the overhand left came, boy, did it come. And I think it was a great stoppage. I really think it was a great stoppage. I'd like to hear your opinion on the stoppage. Radzhabov seemed a little frustrated by the stoppage, but I had no problem with it. And I was really, really, really impressed with Rebecki today.
I think those frustrations, Harry, would have came over the overall circumstances of this fight. And I think the writing was on the wall in the early stages of this fight, where Rebecki came out on the front foot and aggressive. And we had Radzhabov, who was moving on the back foot kind of tentatively, and that was happening at the very early stages of the fight. The leg kicks that Rebecki were throwing opened up the other shots beautifully, and that's what set up the overhand left towards the end. And that was it. I think there was an accumulation of damage that had been received there by Radzhabov, and I think that I think it was Chris Taglioni that was the ref here, or I'm not quite sure. But I thought it was an absolutely excellent stoppage as well. Live to fight another day. That's what we need to get more used to here. Obviously, we could talk about that in the main event as well, but a very, very impressive performance from Rebecki. And, it's the type of performance that makes me look forward to seeing his next fight as well, where whoever that may be. I mean, we're not going to spend too much time trying to match up maybe the prelim fighters here, but I mean, let's throw in Rebecki with anybody in the lightweight division. I'm just excited to see him again. Who is there any name that tips your tongue maybe that you'd like to see him in there with next?
Depends what we want to do with him, you know?
Yeah.
Like, we could go slow roll and we could go Mark Madsen if he wants another one. We could do a Claudio Puelles, right? If we want to see if there's a bit of a grappling break there. We could go Brad Riddell, but we could also, and the fight I would actually like to see is a Nasrat Haqparast.
Interesting. Like, I mean, I wouldn't be too surprised if the UFC kind of catapulted in and gave him somewhat of a name in the lightweight division, because you're talking about a guy here with a massive win streak. I think he's won his last 16, 17 in a row now. So that's some good cannon fodder to promote a fight as well. So it'd be interesting to see what the UFC do with him, because based off that performance, he's a pretty exciting prospect in the lightweight division. But, you know, there's a lot still to learn in there as well. And I don't think Radzhabov gave you the best account of himself either which way for one reason or another. Obviously, when you miss weight, there's going to be some questions raised as well about his preparations. But we should move on to Tafa Ricci versus Gillian Robertson, a fight that you were pretty comfortable in predicting on our preview show. And you were right as well. Tafa Ricci went out there and won relatively easy. You know, maybe I have a little bit of a soft spot, like you said. You have a soft spot for Randy Brown. I would for Gillian Robertson as well, but the move down in weight, the likely or the thought she would have had maybe a little bit of a strength advantage here didn't materialize that way. But I think the limitations of her game were truly on show again in this fight as well, where there's not enough variation on the feet. There is only straight 1-2s that are being thrown, which are easy to counter against. And Tafa Ricci was able to keep this fight standing for long periods as well, Harry. You know, the part of the fight that you've seen, I mean, any takeaways from here? I mean, you predicted it, so you're hardly too surprised with the outcome of this one as well.
I was and have had for a significant amount of time a very, very soft spot for Gillian Robertson also, simply because, you know, I don't hide behind my love of grappling, right? And so when you find a grappler who can, when she goes out and competes in sport grappling, she's excellent, right? Really, really good, Gillian Robertson. So when you find someone that can transition from sport grappling and make that work at an elite level in MMA, and, you know, she's in the UFC, so she's at an elite level, then that's always exciting to me. And when Gillian Robertson has in the past, and I'm sure maybe in the future, gets fights into a situation where she is comfortable, she's a real handful, a serious problem for women. The problem... Go on.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
The problem is that we're in an era now where modern MMA trumps everything. And Absolutely. If you're not fully well-rounded, it just doesn't matter anymore. Mackenzie Dern learned that the hard way and has done her absolute best with the tools that she has to round out her game. And I just don't see the same level of progression from Gillian Robertson. And so cutting down a weight class, firstly, fuck weight cutting. Secondly, I don't see any skill progression. Tafa Ricci is a well-rounded fighter. She's not an elite striker. She's not an elite grappler. She's a well-rounded fighter. And when you come up against something like that, as your Gillian Robertson, what are you going to do? You know, what are you going to do? You can't drag her into your specialism.
Yeah.
And she's able to put you into a position where you're not comfortable. And in modern MMA, that's just deep, deep waters, you know?
And I guess my hopes were for Gillian Robertson that we would have seen a couple of extra wrinkles in her game, because you need to have plan B, you need to have plan C, D, E, and F, however far you want to go along, because, you know, fights aren't always going to go the way that you expect. And we could say the same about the next fight, Zhumagulov. The fight didn't go the way he expected either. He chose to kind of stand and bang with UFC newcomer Joshua Van, who came in here on short notice and really, really impressed here. And we've got another one in the 125-pound division here, Harry, don't we?
I don't know where we're finding these lads. I don't know how
No.
many lads. I tell you what, why don't we just collapse a couple of divisions to make room on the roster for more of these lads? Like, I was so impressed with Joshua Van. Like, comes out, tough first round. That certainly was a way to welcome yourself to the UFC. Zalgas just put a pace on him, as he does, and was just a better fighter in that first round. And then Joshua calmed down, took his time a little bit, allowed Zalgas to come onto him, used his feet, used his head, and just landed the better shots. And okay, it was a split decision. It was a close fight, but I couldn't have been more impressed with a kid that's, 22, 23? Like, very, very impressive UFC debut for me.
I mean, like we've seen it recently with Steve Urquhart as well, who came in and beat David Dvorak on short notice. We have another one here. Is there anything that really stood out to you with Joshua Van that like really made your eyes open and say, what, for young guys coming in here, when you're watching them, when you're studying them, when you're analyzing them, what are some of the things that you're looking for? Or what, maybe to restructure the question, is that what are some of the things that you've seen from Joshua Van that makes you think that this guy could be a player in 125-pound division?
So I've just checked. He's 21 years of age.
Wow, that's crazy. He's got all the time in the world here.
So the thing that I look for, especially in a young fighter, is variety and composure. Those are the two things, right? Because there are going to be moments, especially when you're young in your MMA career, but also young in your human self, where composure can be lacking. When you go through, and this is maybe a bit philosophical, but when you go through life, challenges will come through to you and they will land on your doorstep, and you have to have the maturity and the composure to be able to deal with them. The same thing happens in fighting, right? There are going to be moments when you're put on the back foot, or you're found in a position you didn't want to be in, or something happens, you slip, you trip, you take a shot, whatever it is, and you have to adjust. And so the ability to adjust, the ability to change the game plan, the ability to make reads, the ability to be composed in doing all of those things is paramount. And after that first round, I was very impressed with the composure. I was impressed with the composure during the first round, right? Where he was taking some shots, he was taking some damage, he was off the pace, but he wasn't panicking. He was just being like, okay, cool. Well, what's happening? He's analyzing what's happening. He's trying to use his footwork. He's trying to adapt. He's trying to head off the steam that Zalgas was building. And then, as I've said, the ability to adjust is just absolutely fantastic. But then it's the variety. What we saw from Joshua Van was that he wasn't scared of the grappling of Zalgas. He was happy to counter. He was happy to pummel. He was happy to try and reverse the positions on the cage. And then in the striking realms, there wasn't I just have a 1-2 high kick. There wasn't I just have a something low kick. Absolutely everything was finished with a low kick. Absolutely everything was finished with something with bad intentions. And that really started to pay dividends. Zalgas really started to struggle on the leg. And I was just very, very impressed with the fundamental use of MMA IQ from Joshua Van. And I would very much like to slow roll him. I have absolutely no need whatsoever for him to be fighting similar level competition to Zalgas anywhere time soon. For the next 3 fights, let's bury him on undercards. Let's forget that he exists, and let's put him against guys that are either debutants in the UFC that have found their way by a split decision on Dana White Contender Series, or let's put him with stalwarts of that division that are low down on that roster, and let's give him time to build. If he goes out and starts blowing people out of the water and he mandates a step up, fine, but I have absolutely no need to see him shot to the moon.
As do I. I have to agree with you 100%. Look, you mentioned there, Harry, that composure was a big thing in Joshua Van's win. Composure was thrown out the rear view window in the fight between Chepe Mariscal and Trevor Peek. 2 boys who just decided to go and throw everything but the kitchen sink here. We have a little bit of a difference of opinion maybe on this fight. I'll throw it over to you first for your opinion. Look at maybe to set you up a little bit. Mariscal came in against Trevor Peek, who was undefeated for his UFC debut. And I felt he gave a pretty good account of himself for a UFC debutant, but technique was thrown out the window here for mad bastardry, really. That's the way I described it on Twitter. And I think you felt the same as well. you're not too keen on these kind of fights and this level of fight in the UFC, and I would like you maybe to kind of explain that opinion, please, sir.
Sure. So maybe I'm too much of a snob, maybe I'm too much of a purist, but this is my opinion, right? My opinion is that we're at a point in 2023 where mixed martial arts has grown so vastly and exploded so vastly, not at a commercial level, but at a tangible skill level. We have grown so much, and that was presented by Ilia Topuria this evening. That's been presented by fights ad nauseum in the last little while. There's been 4 or 5 fights that have really sort of pushed the envelope of what's possible in mixed martial arts. And the UFC for the longest time has been the premier organization with the underlying notion, if you will, that the best fighters in MMA are competing in that organization. Now, we can have, as I slip off my chair, we can have discussions and debates and arguments about whether that's still the case. But the UFC, for the most part, is still the premier organization in terms of commercial viewership and commercial sales. And so I think that the UFC has a duty, I guess, to put fights on that, for the most part, are pushing the envelope or working towards pushing the envelope of what's possible in MMA. What we saw with Chepe Mariscal and Trevor Peek was an entertaining fight if you are looking for absolute garbage. And what I mean by that is we can't argue on the toughness or the durability or the willingness to go in and fight another human being, because both men had it in absolute spades. Both men, whatever they're getting paid, add another 2 zeros on it, and it's probably just about enough for the effort with what they put out this evening. They went out and they put their lives on the line. And for that, I can do nothing but absolutely congratulate and celebrate them, because it is something that I will never do at that level and I will not be willing to do. And so we must congratulate and celebrate both men for that. However, my issue is that we are accepting and celebrating poor fighting. Very little of what happened, mostly from Trevor Peek, frankly. Chepe Mariscal attempted to do the fighting things, but most of what we saw from Trevor Peek was completely inefficient, very, 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 very poor striking. Now, it's effective in that Mariscal had absolutely fucking no idea what was coming where, and Trevor Peek has a serious chin and some serious grit on him. And so when Mariscal was dragging him into the deep water, he was able to survive. But the promotion of poor technique, poor fighting is just something I don't like.
Somebody called the fun police on Harry quick. No, I'm only joking. Don't get me wrong.
I couldn't argue. I really couldn't.
No, I don't mind those kind of fights. I mean, we're gonna briefly touch on Dumas and Brundage fight here. Give me a fight like Mariscal and Peek any day of the week over a fight against like we've seen with Dumas and Brundage. Look at technique wasn't there. If we were watching these fights throughout the card, yeah, it would be understandable. But I do understand it's kind of not the level you would expect to see in the UFC, but at least both of these guys went out and decided to put on a show. And that's a lot more than what other people have done inside the octagon. And we'll go back to Dumas and Brundage in a little bit, but that's my opinion on that. I don't mind seeing those fights. At least I kind of get a little bit exciting. Look, there's different tiers of entertainment that we see inside in the octagon. And this was probably low tier technical entertainment where two guys who were at similar enough levels who kind of just threw game plans and technique and just decided to bite down on their gum shield and throw some fists. I enjoyed it. I do understand what you're saying 100%, and it's a completely valid and well put together point that you have, but we'll have to agree to disagree on this, whereas, I don't mind that. you know, if I was asked to watch one of those type of fights each and every week, I wouldn't be too argumentative against that as well. Let's move forward. Let's touch briefly on the last two fights of the card. And the next fight we will talk about is Jenkins versus Emmers. What were your thoughts on this fight? Obviously, Jack Jenkins coming in here, utilizing that leg kick game of his. I think I dusted off a tweet the night of the fight saying that, you know, with those leg kicks, Jack Jenkins has broken the leg of 3 of his opponents in the past. So that just shares the type of impact he throws those shots with. And there were a huge factor in his performance and his game plan tonight, again, against Jamal Emmers, who I feel will be disappointed when he looks back at the fight that he didn't show a little bit more output in the early stages of the fight. I think he got into this fight towards the latter stages, but at that stage, Harry, it was too little too late. And Jack Jenkins went on to win the split decision in what was a fairly close fight.
Yeah, really close fight to me. Really close fight. These guys were so well matched. And I rate both of them. I really enjoyed the fight. I think the difference for me, and you say the leg kicks, but it was the application of the leg kicks that was different for me. Like, not only was the leg kicks landing and they were obviously impactful, you know, you mentioned the tweet about the broken legs and whatever. The placement of the leg kicks was great from Jack Jenkins, but it's also the rhythm with which he throws them in, right? It's not just being thrown naked. It's not just being thrown in a rudimentary, like, oh, I throw a jab and now a low kick comes. It's being thrown in the middle of combinations. It's being thrown at the end of combinations. It's being thrown off stance switches. It's being thrown off angle changes. It's being thrown in such a multitude of different areas that Jamal Emmers will feel a couple of them and be like, oh, fuck, I don't really want to take many of these. And then from so many different angles and so many different situations, Jamal Emmers has to really think about where he's putting his feet and how he's setting up his own attacks. And that buys Jack Jenkins a little bit of time. But I was really impressed with Emmers' ability to break through the space and use his own length. And I think this was something that really brought him into the fight, is he realized that he could pull the leg kick out of Jack Jenkins as he could pull some of the hooking out of Jack Jenkins and land with his own longer, rangier straights. And that caused Jack Jenkins a ton of problems. But I really enjoyed the fight. I thought both men had a really good account of themselves, and I'm very, very excited to see both of them compete again. No problem whatsoever.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And that will lead us to the last fight, Dumas. Look, we were excited to see Jenkins Emmers again. I'm not excited to see either Dumas or Brundage again. It was an absolutely awful fight to open up the card. We had a Brundage who clearly did not want to be in there and fighting tonight for whatever reason. And we had a Dumas who had the inability to capitalize on that mentality and get the fight there. What resulted was a really boring, poor quality, unanimous decision win for Cedriquez Dumas in the middleweight division. Really poor fight, this, Harry.
When you said before, if you would prefer, what would you prefer, a Mariscal Peek fight or a Dumas Brundage fight? And you said we agree to disagree. I will 100% agree with you. When this fight was hot, steaming garbage. Like, if you are competing against a guy who jumps a guillotine more than once, you have to finish the fight. Like, you absolutely have to. And there was a moment that I tweeted out because, you know, when I'm on Twitter, specifically when I'm talking through the fights, and, you know, obviously I don't watch fights live very often. I usually watch them the day after. I'm trying to give some thoughts on the analysis of the fight rather than shitting on fighters or, you know, talking about commentary or whatever. And there was a moment when I just couldn't help myself, which was Brundage had somehow managed to find himself on the bottom again. Dumas had done a good job of initially pinning him into side control and sort of dominating that position with a head and arm and good hip position. But Brundage was so obviously looking for an underhook to get back up, and Dumas just rushed the whole thing so poorly and found himself on the bottom, having his face lamped in. And I'm like, what are we like? This is, you know, I've just
it's a real problem in the UFC. Look at, and we don't like we'll always give an honest perspective. But for me, I feel that this level of a fight is much more of a red flag for the way UFC is going, more so than Mariscal and Peek, because these two fighters don't belong in the UFC. And I shudder to think, what if this fight didn't happen on this card? Like, what did this fight offer this card? We could have had one less fight. We could have had more opportunities for other people maybe to come in here. But it's something that I really struggle with. And, there's always people who are going to be overcritical of these UFC cards. I don't think that we fall into the battle. I think we always try and be as honest as we can and straight down the line. But these two guys, this was a terrible UFC caliber fight. And I think it's an insult to the fans and an insult to the UFC as kind of, this marketing tool to have a fight of this caliber open up your card, in my opinion. And that's me being completely honest in how I feel about two of these guys. We see some guys and we're not sure if they're going to crack the top 15, or we see some guys if we're not sure they're going to crack the top 10. But the fact that they may have a chance to do that makes fights intriguing to us, makes fighters intriguing to us. Neither of these two guys, they're going to be lucky if they pick up 2 wins in the UFC after this, to be honest. And that's the God's honest truth here. Is that too harsh?
I'm not sure I'd say it's a complete disgrace to the UFC, but what I would say is I think, if I'm being completely open and honest, I think Dumas has a far higher ceiling than Brundage. It looks like he's a guy that if you put him in the right type of gym, he might improve a little bit. But this is a guy that should be rounding out his game on the regional scenes. Absolutely agree with that 110%. Is Dumas, or could Dumas be UFC level? Yeah, probably. He could be a guy that he gets a couple of wins on UFC Dana White Contender Series or whatever it is, comes in, has a couple of fights, fine, no problem.
But what is UFC level in this day and age? Because I think we're after lowering the bar quite more than what it has been in the past, where it's like, I just don't care about a guy like this. And like, I don't care about seeing a guy going in there. Like, we're talking about fighters here are looking on with the hopes and the dreams of fighting in the UFC. And we have guys who are unsigned right now who have to look at a fight like this when they're sitting on the sidelines, more than deserving of an opportunity to open up the card. Like, give me, we always lean on the Irish guys, and there's prospects all over the world, but like, give me a Paul Hughes who can go in and open up a card, or give me a Vucenic, or give me, you name your prospect, no matter where they are in the world. There's ones that exist in Canada and the US, and that's something that I find really hard to digest with the current product. And it's not like we're not talking about these fights happening throughout the card, but I think a fight like this, one is enough for us to have a reaction like this, in my opinion. And sorry for interrupting there, but please continue.
I mean, I think I agree, right? Like, I think I agree. Like, I understand that fighters need to fight, and if you've been signed to the UFC, you need a matchup, you need a fight, and in the same vein, the UFC need to fill cards, and I understand all of that, right? I get all of that. That's not a problem. I think I hold the similar opinion to you, that if you're looking for a fighter to fill a card, well, there's a couple of lads there that we can name, we can reel off, that will probably be on a lesser contract than these gentlemen, so pay isn't a problem, and equally are probably more skilled than these guys. But I just saw on Instagram a little while there, just before we started, that Gary Rooney has decided to go pro, right?
Yes,
he's going to have his first pro fight there in a little while, and you won't be finding those mistakes that Dumas was making. You won't be finding Gary Rooney jumping guillotines. And this is a guy that hasn't made his pro debut yet. And so I agree 100% that there are fighters of a similar ilk to fighters that we've named that are desperate for a UFC call-up. Now, sure, look, I'm not saying go and sign Gary Rooney to the UFC. That's absolutely...
No, I get what you're saying, though. I get what you're saying. It's the level of skill set that you're bringing into the octagon, and there should be a level of expectation there as well. And like with this, I don't mean to be too hard on either fighter here, because when the UFC comes to call, and of course you're going to take that opportunity there. It's more so an attack on maybe the business model or the structure of UFC that we've seen in recent years. And I really, really I mean, I know there's probably one man I could have to turn to here to try and get me excited about either of these, and only one man that could do it, and that's E. Spencer Kite. But I'd say he'd even struggle, and I'm very looking forward to hearing his assessment on this fight as well. Just not good. And let's finish it off here, Harry. Let's round it off with a couple of your final thoughts on the card itself. Look at Ilia Topuria cemented his status as elite level competition at 145. Maycee Barber did as well. In the 125 pound division, she secured herself into kind of a contention role per se, not maybe as up in it as Ilia Topuria. Please leave me, sir, with some of your final thoughts on this card before we wrap it up.
So, I was vastly impressed with many of the performances. I think there's a really, really interesting fighter in Joshua Van that we have now been introduced to. I think Rebecki has some real value coming out of this evening. I am still incredibly upset that we did not get to see Tatsuto Taira perform. I think him versus Cledson Rodriguez would have been an absolutely phenomenal fight. And so still my heart bleeds for not being able to see that. But overall, I really enjoyed the prospect of this card on paper. And yet again, I think it delivered. I thought it was a really enjoyable night of fights. And specifically, because they were on at a time that I'm, willing to stay up for, I really enjoyed following them along with you. And so thank you very much as usual.
As did I, sir. And as did I enjoy breaking the card down. I agree. Great card. We'll be back with the preview show this week. And we will see you then on Thursday. Go and follow Harry Powell at BJJ_Harry Powell. Go follow me at IO'Neill MMA. Check out the Severe Spotlight on SevereMMA.com. And we will see you the next time. Thanks for everybody for listening in. Chat to you then.